The general election in the UK is coming up in 2 days. The Conservative Party, which has been in power for 14 years, is expected to lose by a very large margin, and lose to Labour, who are expected to win a very big majority. But a party that has gotten a lot of the attention is Reform UK, the party which is now led by Nigel Farage. It got a lot of attention before it was led by Nigel Farage. He only became leader like a month ago, after the election was announced, and only decided to run for a seat in Parliament. But yeah, they at some point I think got to 15 or even more percent in the polls. I think they dropped a little bit. And the question we're discussing today is, considering the choices that the British people have in 2 days' time, should they vote for Reform UK? There are four of us on this panel today. Usually you hear us very much agreeing with each other on a lot. Today, I actually just found out in the production meeting that we had before the Daily Objective that I disagree. I thought I would disagree with two of my co-panelists. It turns out I disagree with all of them. So it's going to be fun and entertaining, and perhaps we will change the course of British politics on this show, although I doubt it. But anyway, welcome to the reality show. Richard, I'm going to go to you first. Should you vote for Reform UK?
Okay, well, I'm going to break with the premise of your question to start with and refuse to answer that. I'm not going to tell anyone how they should vote. I'm not going to tell anyone what they should do. You make up your own damn minds, quite honestly. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do and what my core reasons are, what I base those reasons on, which policies I find most represent the key values given the choice we've got, and I'll go through that in the course of this. I think it's important to recognise firstly that the UK system that involves both a local constituency and effectively becomes the national party. So you've got one eye on who your local candidate is and one eye on the national picture. And depending on where you live, that might well affect which party you choose to vote for. And if I lived in certain constituencies in different parts of the country, I would vote differently. So, I mean, that's it needs laying out to start with. We've also got to recognise we don't live in an objectivist ideal world or even a country that has reason at its focus. And the politicians we're being offered reflect just that. And the choices we have to make from are what is available. So why am I voting for reform? What is my key reason? Well, the key reason, I think, is because the voice that they represent, the arguments that they make need to be heard within Parliament against the absolute barrage of other parties who are trying to hold back such a view and have been for some time now. And a lot of that has been sheer evasion, and a lot of that has led to a lot of the problems we're in now. And one of those has been, for example, I think Reform were exceptionally strong compared with the other parties, not as strong as I would like them to be during the COVID lockdown period. And I think if you have an objectivist, reason-based leaning, and you recognise the importance of individual rights, then the whole lockdown period was the worst abuse of individual rights that anyone has ever seen. And the two main parties tried to outcompete each other in terms of how they would suppress those rights. And Reform, however, were making the counter argument for not having lockdowns, for not having mandates, for all of the things which I think have led to a lot of the problems, including inflation that we've got now, including all of the effects of worklessness and people choosing to exploit the welfare system even more than they were doing before. All of those things come out of the stances that those two parties took. And that's why I can't possibly support either of those two parties. And I have to support the one which, when you know the cookie crumbled, when it actually came down to it, they were the ones that took the best of the positions on it. And I think that's a crucial reason why.
So I want to quickly go to PC's super chat. Thank you, PC. PC says reform will just help Starmer, I feel. And later on, he follows, he says voting Tory because reform is a wasted vote. Well, So I really hate to disagree with super chats, but no, and especially since I'm not advocating vote for reform, but no, look, you're helping Starmer against who? Against the people who have turned this country into, more of a socialist country than it was under Tony Blair, closer to socialism. Anyway, I will speak when it's my turn. I'm abusing already my power as moderator, so I will go to Matthew. Matthew, I'll change the question because Richard, your criticism of the question is valid. Are you voting Reform UK? Well, I guess the producer has spoken and muted you because he maybe thinks your views should not be heard. But you yeah, you are muted, so now you're
Oh,
muted.
sorry. I'm not voting for Reform UK for a number of different reasons. Despite the fact that I do agree with a lot of what Richard has just said, particularly in terms of lockdowns and so forth. Um, I'm just going to make basically probably four or maybe five points because I appreciate there's limited time. There's probably more I could say. As far as I'm concerned, one area where they are clearly even worse than the Conservatives, and it's quite an important one to me, is immigration policy. Insofar as they seem, as far as I understand it, to want to limit immigration, which is currently legal under our already very limited, screwed up immigration system. They do, I appreciate, have a number of policies which appear to be more sort of market orientated in certain areas. It seems to me that it's quite superficial. They don't, for example, seek to certainly properly privatise the NHS. They are talking about introducing more private capital into the NHS without actually properly looking at privatising it. They appear to me to have somewhat of an issue with racism. One of their canvassers, and I'll be clear, it was a canvasser, not a candidate, was actually caught on camera a few days ago using a term which in this country is certainly regarded as a serious racial slur towards people of Indian background, the relevance being that the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is of that kind of heritage. There's been apparently some other similar issues within the party, to the point that this morning it was in the news that one of their candidates has actually disowned the party. Excuse me. Told anyone that was going to support her to support the Conservative Party instead, because she cannot support a party with these kind of racist views. Insofar as Farage has attempted to address this, excuse me, I wasn't coughing before we started, I do apologise. I don't think Farage has really gone far enough in terms of what he could do to call that behaviour out. His analysis of the Russia-Ukraine situation, I think, is completely off in a way I find very troubling, because he appears to be suggesting that Ukraine and the West actually effectively provoked Putin into the invasion. One last point I want to make is that, as far as I understand it, they suggest leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, but there's no indication that I can see in the manifesto of what, if anything, they would suggest putting in place of the current human rights setup. And I say it in that way because if they actually were proposing something, some sort of sensible alternative proposal, I'd be perfectly willing to look at that and consider it. But as it stands, I think they are bad news, quite frankly.
All right. I have a follow-up, but I'll ask it when we're back to you. Marco,
I'm just going to get myself some water. I'll be back in just 2 seconds, guys.
Marco, will you be voting Reform UK?
I will. The reason is, first of all, just a little historic context here. Reform is effectively the Brexit party, which was created by Nigel Farage after the 2017-18, in 18 probably, when the main part, 19, Jesus. In 2019, when the main parties, Conservative and Labour, were trying to do everything in their power to not implement the decision on the 2016 referendum to leave the European Union. So at that point, Farage set up a party, in a couple of months, set up the party and won the European election with a massive majority. That forced Theresa May out. The Conservative Party took over through Boris Johnson. And effectively, Farage was the guy who got rid of Theresa May, who was a staunch Remainer, and tried to budge and managed to destroy effectively the result of Brexit. And so after the victory of Boris Johnson, Farage left politics, assuming that his job was done. He was a one-issue politician. He campaigned for 20 years in order to leave the European Union. And after we left, he carried on living his life as in a different career. But in the last few days, few weeks, he decided to come back because he realized there's no alternative in Britain, and there are, as he likes to say, Britain is broken, and he's tried to reform it. That's a catchy phrase that he's using. However, the prevailing philosophy out there is an irrational one. So the mysticism and the skepticism that prevails in people's thinking, whatever the nature, is translated into political institution and politicians and various things that we are subject to. So whoever you choose to vote for will be a mixed economy representative. It's going to be a statism heavy. So the choice here really is between which degree of statism you go for. Are you going to go for Labour that would like to push the UN-sponsored world agenda, manage decline, and all this kind of stuff? Will you go for the Conservatives, who've done a terrible performance in the last 14 years, so that they made themselves unelectable? Or will you try to go for somebody who suggests a positive view for the future? I mean, you cannot reverse irrationality with a single choice of a party or with a single election, but you can try to curtail it. You can try to stop and vote for the party which is more likely to implement or at least push for some of the values that you believe in and some of the rational values. Now, the way the system in Britain is, every constituency elects one MP. There are 650 constituencies, 650 MPs. So the guy who gets the more votes in a constituency wins the post, he becomes the MP. The second runner, even if it's, I don't know, 70,000 vote versus 69,000 vote, the 79,000 vote wins, becomes MP, and the other votes count for nothing really. So the way I'm looking at it, rather, I know that the Labour Party has virtually won already. So what I'm thinking, by voting the Reform Party, I'm actually leveraging the proportional vote. So at the end of it, Reform might not win an MP, who stands in parliament. However, my vote will be counted. At the end of it, if there is a big chunk votes enough, like more than the UK Independent Party did in 2015, that will force whoever sits in parliament to listen to the big majority of people who voted for none of the above. Ultimately, whoever wins this election, it's going to be an injustice. It's a break of the principle of justice. None of these parties deserve to win. The Labour Party stands for some abominable stuff, which I can't even think of. The Tory Party deserve to lose because they've done crap. And, even the Reform Party, you could argue, is not perfect. However, some of the stuff they stand for example, the cancellation of net zero targets, Richard said that they stood up against the lockdown and the various mandates. And the fact that they say, well, we don't care what race and what gender you are, what we want is equality under the law. And that's, a way to push back. They argue for a smaller state. And it's the only party you will hear saying things like, taxation is your money and you should keep more of it. Every other party is for more money, bigger state, and you shut up as an individual, put up for a common good. Now, we all know the common good doesn't exist in the same way the common brain, the common eyes, the common stomach don't exist. So I'm left with the only option to vote reform, just to try and not reverse the tide, but at least try and go for the guys who are trying to reverse some of the stupidity going on right now.
All right, let me go to the super chats. Thank you, Equal to Reality. Equal to Reality says, I cannot vote Tory due to their policy of bringing back national service, i.e. slavery, and never labor. Yeah, this was an interesting thing that Rishi Sunak did at the beginning of the campaign. I guess he thought he was doing too well in the polls, so he although apparently that's a somewhat popular view. So, but I agree with that. Thank you, Apollo Zeus, for the super chat. Apollo Zeus asks who will come in second. Of course, it's going to be the Conservatives. I mean, this is not a. I don't think that's really a question. If anything, it might be a question in terms of percentage of the vote. Although I think in that case, it's also going to be the Conservative Party. But in terms of seats, I don't think there's any doubt. I think Reform is as likely to come in second as the Conservatives are of their chances of winning the election. All right. There's a lot that was said there and not a word I agreed with. So let me try to decide where I'm going to start. Matthew, you said reform is worse than the Tories on immigration. Yes, and that is not easy to do. I mean, the Tories are terrible on immigration. The Tories are terrible on pretty much everything. And when people now say, look how Brexit failed, it's not that Brexit in itself failed. It's not that Britain not being a part of the European Union is as such a bad thing. It's that there were bad things about the European Union and being a member state of it. There were good things about it. I think overall it was clearly in a cost benefit analysis, it was clearly the right thing to do to leave. But you could have kept the good things, and you could have done that unilaterally. Britain chose to do away with the good parts, like free movement of people and goods, and keep lots of the bad regulation. And again, the free movement of people is one of the great things about being a member of the European Union. There's a lot that can be fixed about which type of people are encouraged to come into this country, but the way you fix that is with internal policy, not immigration policy. You fix it by making crime not pay, by making people who are criminals actually suffer and regret the fact that they decided to commit crime, and you do it by not offering handouts to people who come in. So as much as I'd love to abolish the welfare state altogether, we can start by abolishing it for people coming in. You come in, you will never get welfare. NHS, yeah, I remember, I don't remember if this was 2015 or 2010. I think it was 2015. There was a leaders debate of like 7 leaders If you remember, this was when, yeah, there were a bunch of parties in the UK, and like Nigel Farage was one of those people. One by one, they all said how they're gonna, no, not how, that they will put more money into the NHS. The NHS is in the UK what Islam is in Iran. Actually, probably worse, more like what Islam is in Saudi Arabia, because many in Iran don't actually seem to approve of the state religion. Um, Marco, you mentioned Nigel Farage left politics after Brexit and came back. Now, that's kind of his thing. I mean, the number of times Nigel Farage has quit politics and then come back right before an election, I've lost count, but it happens all the time. And Nigel Farage is possibly the greatest orator in British politics. He's, just very, very articulate and well-spoken, and can kind of, I think it helps him get away with some absolute horrible things that he says, because he says them well. And yeah, the things he says on immigration and the policy on Russia. This was not, some random gaffe. This is not somebody who made a joke 20 years ago that back then was considered funny, is now is considered sexist or something. This is a statement about, what he would actually do as leader, what policy he would pursue in respect to what I think is the biggest threat to Western countries, or not even, if not, maybe not Russia itself is the biggest threat, but the biggest threat to the West is the consequences of not fully supporting Ukraine and not standing up to Russia, because those consequences will be felt where Iran is active, they'll be felt where China is active. It sends a message to those who want to see the downfall of the West, that the West will not defend itself from its enemies. I probably have a lot more to say, but I will read a super chat and then go to Richard. Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says, history has shown these new parties that appear do not last. Galloway's party will sink fast. Well, maybe, but the thing is, the ideas behind Galloway's party, unfortunately, aren't going anywhere until we do something about it. Richard.
Okay. So I'm torn in about 15 different directions now. I've got so many strands I could pull on here. Let's take that last one just while it's fresh for the super chat there. In Canada, a Reform Party was created that ended up doing essentially a reverse takeover of the Conservative Party and ended up with the Prime Minister, and I think it was Stephen Harper, who ended up leading the Canadian government there, who was one of the better ones. So it can be done. And we're in a very different age than we ever were, where people being tied to the vote that they've been following for generations, or that their parents did, or they've always done every time they turn out at the ballot box every 5 years. Those days are gone. People are now much more keen to make a judgment at the time based on how they've experienced the last 5 years since they last had a chance to do so. And that's as it should be. Because it shouldn't just be a tribalist loyalty contest based on your football colours of who you've always voted for. I don't agree with your earlier point, PC, about this just allows Labour more votes. Labour is going to win anyway. What's important is what the opposition voices within Parliament are to Labour, and that sort of Labour's likely to get around 40-odd%. The Tories are likely to get around 20-odd something percent, and Reform on current trends is somewhere around the 15% mark, give or take a few either way. Those voices need to be heard, and the Labour and Conservative voices are one and the same. They are pushing the same agendas. So when it comes to net zero and the climate communism that's being pushed on us with subsidies and, whether it's which boilers you have or what you can drive and when, what type of car you can buy or what type of car can be sold, by which date, all of those sorts of things, all of the repression on industry in terms of fracking, in terms of oil and gas licenses, all of those things, the Labour and Tories, you can't put a fag paper between them. You can't divide them at all. They're essentially the same. And Reform is saying to do away with that. And that alone will allow the country and its population to thrive. Now, I'm tempted to answer some of Matthew's comments, but I'm also got one eye on the clock here, and I want to get some positive things as to why I'm voting for reform, because this isn't just a protest vote, although there's a big element of that. There are some very good policies. The net zero is one I just mentioned. The ECHR, I do agree with. I think getting out of the European Court for Human Rights. I accept Matthew's point. You do need to define what it's going to be, but I don't think any party will be able to do that at this early stage. You just have to take their broad ideals, such as Marco analysed there when he was talking about people being equal before the law, and the core elements of human rights. And a lot of the scaremongering about what would be introduced is just that scaremongering, and I dismiss it. One of the policies of reform is to get rid of the BBC licence fee. Now, in terms of changing the culture of the country, that is one of the key things that I would want in my manifesto, were I writing my perfect manifesto. So that would be well up there together with net zero. When it comes to the NHS, now no party, as you say, is good on the NHS, but reform have been pushing back on moving the dial away from where we've been, talking about how France does it, for example, which is includes a private element and private healthcare to it. Now, that is part of the journey of moving away from the NHS. It's part of the reforming the whole system of healthcare and making it less socialised. It's going to take well, I'll be long dead before the NHS is no more, I'm sure. But in order to get even towards that goal and allow people to actually get the medical health care that they need and pay for it when they need it, these are the steps you need. So I think they're pushing in the right direction on that. And I realize I've been talking for a while, so I'll just summarize by saying that this is about nudging the country and the other parties in a better direction from where we've been going, and making sure that voice is heard in Parliament. And I would like Nigel Farage's voice to be one of those voices, that oratory skills that you spoke of, to be heard in Parliament, so that we actually hear what a chunk of the people are saying across the country, and is never heard and is suppressed by media coverage and the political set. And that's led to such a lot of disillusionment, which I hope will be exposed by the fact that many people who haven't voted for years, I do hope, will turn out at this election, because for the first time since probably 2015, they've actually got on the ballot a party that they can at least express that view against.
So Matthew, before I go to you, just a couple of comments in the chat. James Valiant says Razi for Parliament. Really? I thought we were friends. This is what you wish from me. I have a much better job, although nowhere near as well paying, but I will take this job with this salary over sitting in Parliament with those people, regardless of who is elected. So no thanks. Thanks, but no thanks. DW says, Matthew, the guy who said the disgusting thing is volunteer was an actor and previously worked for Channel 4. Yeah, I've heard that as well. There's some issue there. But Matthew, you can comment on that. But I also wanted to ask you, because when I asked Richard and then Marco, both of them said they are voting for Reform UK. You said you're not. So what are you doing with your vote, if I may ask? And unfortunately, I know the answer, but maybe enlighten our audience.
I appreciate it came as a bit of a surprise, Razi. I'm very sorry. I very, very reluctantly decided to vote Labour. The reason for that basically is because I'm trying to take a long-term view. In part because of that. I think everyone agrees Labour's going to win. It's a question of how much by. What I hope will happen is the Conservatives will go away, do some serious soul searching, and actually work out what they actually stand for. I'm sort of just about old enough to remember the Thatcher government back in the 80s. Very, very different to the Conservative Party of today. There was clearly at least a strong influence of sort of classical liberalism, and I hope people understand what I mean by that term, even if it wasn't completely consistently so. So the Conservatives losing heavily, certainly at the moment, I think would be no bad thing. In fact, I think it's exactly what they deserve after particularly the last couple of years. Labour under Starmer have said very clearly, and I said earlier that immigration is one policy I am very focused on at the moment. Starmer has said very clearly that he will stop this horrible, horrible scheme that the Conservatives have been pushing, where basically pretty much anyone turning up claiming asylum is going to be shipped out to Rwanda. It's a scheme that our Supreme Court in this country actually ruled was illegal. And Sunak's government basically turned around, put fresh legislation through Parliament, trying to effectively change the law to get around what the Supreme Court had said, which for me is one of the big reasons, I stress not the only reason, but one of the main reasons I'm so disillusioned with the party. Razi, earlier you touched on the sort of relationship with the EU and the fact that we essentially got rid of some of the better aspects of having been in the EU when we didn't necessarily have to. That is something that Starmer says he wants to look at and wants to have some sort of further agreement with the EU to try to some extent to resolve issues like free movement. This is a completely different debate that I don't want to digress off too much into, but it is actually perfectly possible to have all of the sort of single market rights, the free movements of goods, free movement of people, etc. Norway and Sweden, particularly at the moment, are outside of the EU, but have a trade deal that achieves exactly that, which is an option that just wasn't looked at in this country when we decided to have Brexit. Starmer, I don't think, is going to go that far from what he says, but he has said that there are things he wants to address. Also, certainly compared to Corbyn, the previous Labour leader, Starmer seems just so much better to me. He's relatively sensible, relatively centrist, and I don't think in the space of 5 years is going to do any sort of irreversible damage, if I can put it in that way.
All right. Marco.
Wow. Keir Starmer, yeah. Let's talk about the guy for a second. I didn't want to mention him, but let's do it. He's the guy who was in charge of destroying every single attempt for the UK to leave the European Union with a proper sense of independence. Now, I'm glad you mentioned Norway and Sweden. Sweden is part of the EU. And incidentally, Sweden is the country who didn't have lockdown, and it's a country that people seem to have forgotten about. So the whole debate about lockdown disappeared, and people only mention Sweden when they talk about liberal policies and high state spending, but never the fact that the lockdown wasn't implemented in Sweden, and they didn't die in droves like anywhere else in the world.
I meant to say Norway and Switzerland. If I said Sweden, I misspoke. I was talking about the trade arrangements.
Sure. No, I understand. But I'm glad you mentioned, because Sweden is one of the things that is never ever mentioned. You cannot point to something positive because the media and the big state is always against it. But anyway, Norway is part of the European Economic Area, so that they adhere to European laws. They have certain privileges, but they have no say whatsoever in what the European Union imposes. So that's not really taking back control and being able to govern your own state, because you have this totally undemocratic bloc. And we've seen how undemocratic the bloc is. They had the election 2 weeks ago, and they already stitched up the main jobs, totally ignoring the result of the election. But let's talk about Britain. The positive case for me to vote for reform is because they are the only people with a positive message out there. They talk about pride. They talk about stop teaching young white kids that they are oppressors, and to black kids that they are the victims. They are about trying and make you feel proud of being part of this country who's founded on the principle of individual right, and trying to rediscover this kind of stuff, trying to let people understand that individuals have to be at the center and the state should be smaller. That, as I said earlier on, they are the only party. They talk about taxation is actually your money and you should keep more of it. You're never going to hear this from conservatives. You could have heard this 40 years ago when Margaret Thatcher was in charge, but you wouldn't do it now. And yes, immigration is a repellent part of their policies. But then again, we have an issue right now, so you have to tackle somehow. Burying your head in the sand the way that the Conservatives and the Labour Party are doing right now is not going to help anyone. They're not going to tackle the issue unless there is a pressure put upon them. The same way Cameron in 2015 was forced to push the referendum because the UKIP, an independent party, Farage's party, won such a big number of votes. So that put pressure on him to offer a referendum in the first place. And about Ukraine, now, media and the main party are indulging right now in scarecrowism. They're trying to scare the pants off you. Just say, oh, if you vote for the guy, the whole world will blow up and the sky will fall and all this kind of stuff. Well, what Farage said, really, if you look at the interview on the BBC, actually said that the reason why Putin felt he could make the case to his people to invade Ukraine was because we've been weak about it. And it's true. We've been weak with Iran, we've been weak with Putin, we've been weak with all sorts of dictators in the world. But he didn't say at all that he would leave Ukraine on its own if he were to win. It's not going to happen anyway, but that's not the point. What you hear from the media right now is lots of drip, this guy is bad, vote for the usual suspects, because as we mentioned before, they are the same thing. They represent the same supranational interest, UN, climate craziness, WHO craziness. You cannot set up a party in a few months, or at least try and promote in a few months, and expect it to perform as well as these things that are so entrenched in every single institution across the world, whether national or international. So yes, there are some wackos in the party. Of course, it's just a logistical thing. But what the Reform Party stands for is actually much more for freedom than anyone else on the ballot.
All right. Sometimes I have a view about something and I want to express it the best way I can, and sometimes I come up with that best way possible. Other times somebody else does, and I'm grateful for that, and being able to read that. Even more grateful when it comes in the form of a super chat. Thank you, Alexis, for the super chat. Alexis says, any complacency, weakness, or faint admiration toward Putin, an existential danger casually threatening to nuke us every Tuesday, means you're unfit to get anywhere close to power. Yeah, look, I would not have voted for Reform UK and would have advocated against it before what Farage said about Putin. But no, what he said was that basically we provoked him by wanting Ukraine to be able to prevent such an attack, by wanting them to defend themselves. The idea that inviting Ukraine into NATO is somehow provoking Putin is ridiculous. The only point of NATO is to prevent Putin from taking over, whichever country he wants. So yeah, Putin is a threat, and as soon as Nigel Farage said that, that became the worst thing about Reform UK, and the other already bad things, or kind of including his policies on immigration, I think took a backseat. Now, look, on election day, I don't remember who it was that mentioned this, but in the UK, yeah, you vote in a certain constituency, you vote for a candidate. I come from a country where you vote for a party, and they have a list. And if they get, 7 seats, then the first 7 people on that list are in parliament and the rest are not. Here you vote for a candidate, and either he wins, goes to parliament, represents your constituency, or he doesn't, and your vote is lost. So of the things you can do on election day, there's voting Labour, there's voting Conservative, there's voting Reform, Lib Dem, all the other parties, and there's not voting at all. As far as these parties go, I think that is very clearly the rational choice. Again, if you live in one constituency or another, it might be different. It might be that you have a great candidate. I assume if I was in Kemi Badenoch's constituency, I would vote Conservative. Although she's still a part of that party and in government, so I would think about it a bit more if that was the case. But yeah, generally speaking, when it comes to these 3 parties, I think it's very clear. No thank you from me to all of them. Now, we talked last week about doing this episode because I knew Marco and Richard, you guys are voting Reform. I knew very much I disagree with that. And had I known, Matthew, what we're in for, this episode probably would have been titled differently and would have covered the election more broadly. You don't think Starmer would do irreversible damage in 5 years? Seriously, he can do irreversible damage like within weeks. Not to mention the fact that, you think this government is pro-Hamas. Wait until you see what he does. He wants to abolish zero-hour contracts. He wants all these environmentalist policies. These can be enacted on day one. Labor isn't going to win by a little bit. They're going to win by a lot. I saw this video the Tories put out today that ended with, you have 48 hours to prevent a Labor supermajority. The Tories aren't even pretending anymore that they're trying to hold on to power. They're only saying, Labor's going to win. They're going to win by a lot. Let's make sure it's not way too much. So, no, Matthew, that, your vote, by the way, generally speaking, your vote, whoever you are, wherever you are, doesn't actually matter. This is, I know it's not a popular thing to say, but mathematically, you will not change the result of any election ever in your life. But yeah, Labor does not need your vote. You could have gone the Labor way and redistributed the wealth of votes and given it to somebody else because they have too many of them. There was one other point since Matthew, you'll get your chance, but actually Richard is next. And Richard, you said something about the TV license and abolishing. First of all, weren't the Tories going to do that? And second, what are you replacing it with is a question that applies here as well. Because does it mean there is no more BBC, or does it mean that we're going to pay for it just through our normal taxes like you do in other countries, rather than through a specific tax? Richard.
When the Tories going to do that should be the epitaph for the Tories. It has no bearing on what Reform are going to do. Getting rid of the BBC license fee is absolutely essential. I don't care if the BBC ceases to exist. Quite honestly, it should be an open, competitive market. The problem is the BBC is not just the national broadcaster that gets the tax from everybody. It's because it has such a dominant position. Its influence over all of the commercial ones is equally distorted by that large influence, and therefore they have to respond to the BBC's tune half the time if they want to try and pull viewers from them. So it's there's no question on that one, to be honest, for me. I mean, that is, and that's something that is never actually offered ever. I don't remember the Tories even offering that, to be honest. They talk about it occasionally in the way they talk about all sorts of things, but yeah. I want to pick up on Matthew's point about Starmer and renegotiating with the EU, because I mean, Marco covered it before, the fact that Starmer tried to stop everything about us leaving the protectionist bloc, and he would capitulate to the protectionist bloc in any way it possibly could to get the lighter form, to get essentially the very worst element of Brexit, which would be following the rules without any of the say, in order to become closer to the EU. And I think your argument, Matthew, about getting rid of the ECHR without knowing what the alternative would be would surely apply to this situation where Starmer's going to, in quotes, renegotiate, but we've got no idea what he's going to trade away, or what he's actually going to ask for even, or what he's actually going to put in place afterwards in any of those forms. So, and his track record is what makes me not trust him one iota on any of those points. I think a sip of water. Hang on a sec. Please don't stop me. I've got more to say. I just wanted to cover Ukraine before I dry up, which is here's some quotes from Farage quickly that you won't have heard, because what's happened in this election is, in the beginning of the election campaign, the main parties did their best to pretend the reform did not exist. When reform began to shoot up in the polls, suddenly they all gang up on reform and try and pull out stooges and throw the case of racism at people and try and scare people and guilt into not voting in a way that you will forget in 5 years or in 2 years or in 10 weeks. But anyway, this is what Farage has said on Ukraine. He said, I'm not and never have been an apologist and supporter of Putin. He said, this invasion of Ukraine was immoral, outrageous, and indefensible. He said that Putin, quote, turned Russia into a brutal dictatorship in which his enemies go to prison and die, and in which journalists disappear. I think what Putin has done in Ukraine is absolutely morally reprehensible in every single way. Have you got that? End of quote. I think this painting of him as being a Putin apologist, etc., is absolute nonsense, and a very cheap way of not having people look at the detail of what he's saying, and not seeing the moral stance in which he's taking.
Okay, sorry, can I add something else? That in 2016, when the Brexit referendum was won by the Leavers, there was the smear that Russia money was found in UKIP and the Brexit party, all this kind of stuff. Well, years after, Aaron Banks actually won a trial, a libel trial against a Guardian journalist who was claiming the same thing about Russia helping the Brexit party. Well, the Guardian lost. It was proven that there was no link with Russia and the result of the Brexit election, and they're getting out the same excuse now, just using Putin as the scarecrow right now. So all the scandal smear is just what it is, a smear.
There's a difference between lying about who's funding something and actually the person speaking in his own words, which is what happened here with Nigel Farage.
The point I want to squeeze in here before we run out of time is that also all of those advocates who are claiming they're on Ukraine's side are frequently not, and that includes the EU. Their imports of Russian liquefied natural gas have gone up 40% from Russia to the EU since the start of the Ukraine war. They take 20% of the fertilizer of Russia even now. So whilst they give it a lot of talk, people like the EU are those who are funding Putin, enabling him to continue this war, and that's the kind of thing that needs to be stopped. Not some war of words in a studio where people cherry pick their quotes and drop the context.
By the way, about running out of time, my apologies to ARCUK members, but we will go over time a little bit, which means the Fountainhead Book Club will start a little bit later. And while I'm doing a sales pitch, I will say ARCUK members, one of the perks you get at all membership levels through the website from £10 and above is joining the WhatsApp groups, one of which is our politics WhatsApp group. All four of us are active there. I assume this conversation will continue today and certainly on election night. And of course, the following elections will also be discussed there. So that's just one of many reasons to become a member. And you also, also support our work by doing so. So consider doing that. There will be a link in the chat, in the live chat, and there is one in the description. Matthew, you have been criticized throughout here, but only because you deserve it, because you voted Labour. But yeah, your response.
Well, I'm going to keep it very, very brief. One, pardon me. So I think can't remember if it was Richard or Marco. One of you said there's no point going into the EEA system because they have no say in the EU rules, etc. Well, very, very briefly, because this isn't what Starmer's advocating. It's actually not correct to say that those countries have no say. There is forget what it's called. Bear with me because I just double checked it. The EEA Joint Committee actually has input along with the EU into what they put into the single market economic rules. So that, leave that aside. It's not what Starmer's advocating. But Starmer, since he became Labour leader, has basically accepted that the Brexit issue is over, and he's made it very, very clear that that's not something he's interested in trying to reverse. He wants to improve the arrangements in certain respects, but he's not trying to take us back into the EU. I'm not going to dispute many of the other criticisms because up to a point I accept that they are valid. I was making a sort of overall judgment, as I said, very, very reluctantly. And clearly it is up to each individual to make up their own mind how you're going to vote.
Marco.
You wonder why Matthew was coughing at the beginning. You're clearly a sign that God exists. Well, what more can I say, really? The only reason to vote reform is because it's not any of the other parties. As I said earlier on, whoever wins is going to be a massive injustice because none of them deserve to win. And unfortunately, it's the same situation in the United States. None of the above seems to be what the majority of people say.
Well, if none of the above is the right thing to do, then why are you voting?
Because someone will win, and at least we're going to have a voice of the people who actually claim towards the right direction. It's not the right direction, but it's towards it. So what other choice have I got, really? And I'm not into eating my own ballot, so.
Yeah, you can just, I don't know. In Israel, we always say you can go to the beach, but I don't think in the UK that's an option. But I don't know. You live next to Westfield, go to the mall. It's a better way to spend the day than queuing up to vote for somebody who, again, whatever criticism he had of Russia, he also, had excuses for Putin. Wants to pour more money into the NHS, wants to stop immigration into this country, and yeah, I mean, again, and Matthew, don't agree with me. What you're doing is worse. You're voting Labour. You're basically Labour is already winning. I know the slogan for the many, not the few, is the previous leader's slogan, but they will very much be able to say we are the many and comply or else after they win the majority that you are helping them achieve. Thank you. Where is this actually? Thank you, Equal to Reality, for correcting me. It's the Atlas Shrugged Book Club, not the Fountainhead Book Club. It was a 2-year book club with the Fountainhead, so that's what I'm used to. All right. Parting thoughts or final statements, as they usually say in debates. Richard.
Well, you can go to the beach if you want. It might be where you have to live or where you have to catch a boat out of here from, because unless we're going to stand up for some of the values which we hold strongly, and those need to be heard within Parliament, and that percentage that you spoke about at the beginning, that needs to be recorded. So it needs to be shown on the end result, regardless of how many MPs are returned to Parliament, that the Conservative Party has lost an awful lot of its percentage support, and that Reform is got an awful lot more than it, and is going to be probably in third place, and close on biting on their heels. It's necessary that that's seen. It's necessary that that voice is heard and understood, and the effect on the other parties results from it.
Matthew.
I don't think there's much I can add to what I've already said, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. There's nothing more to be said after you vote Labour. Marco.
Well, I'm fed up with this anti-UK sentiment out there, pushed by both parties. I'm fed up with this kind of move towards anti-civilization, the net zeros and all this kind of stupid policies are pushing. So I'm able to vote Reform in my constituency because it's not gonna allow a jihadi candidate to win. So I'm happy to do it. But I can understand some people in different constituencies might have different issues to consider.
Well, the election takes place on Thursday. We know the result. We'll be here talking about it on Friday on the Daily Objective. We'll be talking about the Labour victory and what that means on the reality show. We'll be talking about the Conservatives' loss and what that means. If I saw some pictures online of England fans leaving the stadium in England's round of 16 match before they scored the equalizer 7 minutes into stoppage time. So maybe we will also have such a moment and have to change our topics for Friday and talk about the Conservatives winning or Nigel Farage being the new Prime Minister. But if not, we already have the episodes and the titles planned for Friday. So join us for that. And if you are a member of the Ayn Rand Centre UK, join us for the Atlas Shrugged Book Club, which starts in a couple of minutes. Thanks, guys. This was a fun debate, and thanks everybody for watching. This is not, UK politics is not usually one of the more popular topics on this channel, so I think it's fewer of you watching, but hopefully those of you who did watch enjoyed it. And just a last-minute super chat from Frank. Thank you, Frank, for the super chat. Frank asks, Marco, when you're in Italy, how do you vote?
I don't.
Yeah, well, he lives in this country. That does make sense that you vote where you live. Thanks. We'll see you back on the Daily Objective and the reality show tomorrow.